Hi everyone, and welcome back to Ways of the World, a brief global history with sources. As we finish our study of commonalities and variations in Africa, the Americas, and Pacific Oceania. And today our focus is alternatives to civilization. And we'll start with Bantu Africa, cultural encounters and social variation. So the movement of Bantu-speaking peoples into Africa south of the equator began around 3000 BCE from southeastern Nigeria and the Cameroons. And over time, there were 400 distinct Bantu languages that developed. And by the 1st century CE, Bantu agriculturalists occupied forest regions of equatorial Africa. Some had probably reached even the East African coast. They spread to most of eastern and southern Africa, and the movement wasn't a conquest or self-conscious migration. But there's significant interaction between agricultural Bantu and hunting and gathering peoples. It was a part of a long-term global phenomenon in which farmers largely replaced foragers as the dominant people on the planet. Let's talk about some Bantu languages. Numbers, agriculture supports more people. In terms of disease, the Bantu brought new diseases to people with little immunity. They were experts in iron, and hunting and gathering peoples were largely displaced, absorbed, or eliminated. Now, there's survival of a few hunting and gathering peoples, the Batwa, or pygmy people, that became quote-unquote forest specialists and interacted with the Bantu. Now, the Bantu culture changed because of encounter with different peoples as they adopted new crops and animals, specifically in East Africa. Now, Bantu people spread their skills and culture through eastern and southern Africa, which shaped parts of the common culture of the Bantu-speaking African areas. Now, part of that culture is ancestor worship, evil as a consequence of individual malice or failing to honor one's ancestors. Drums were a key instrument, body movement over footwork and dance, and women were agricultural workers and innovators. We see a creation of many distinct societies and cultures in the time period 500 to 1500 CE. In Kenya, decision-making was by kinship and age structures. Zimbabwe and Lake Victoria region, there were larger kingdoms. Along the East African coast, after 1000 CE, is the development of rival city-states. And there's a development that depended on a large number of factors. Now, many Bantu communities were less patriarchal than urban civilizations, and the religion placed less emphasis on a remote high god and more on ancestral or natural spirits. Incorporated into that are sacrifices, especially cattle, to access power of dead ancestors. The power of charms was activated by proper rituals, widespread belief in witches. Diviners could access the world of the supernatural. It was based on the notion of quote-unquote continuous revelation. New messages still come from the world beyond. There was really no missionary impulse. And one of the ways the migratory routes of the Bantus have been traced is by the investigations of linguists, people who study the origins of language. By studying commonalities in some words in South and East Africa today, linguists can follow the Bantu migration back to its origins. Okay, so our first image here, a female Luba ancestral statue. Representations of powerful women, often ancestral figures, were frequent in the wood carvings of the Bantu-speaking Luba people of Central Africa. Many of them showed women touching their breasts or a gesture signifying devotion, respect, and the holding of secret knowledge. Now think about how is this practice of honoring ancestors through statues, as shown in this image, similar to the respect given ancestors in early Euro-Asian civilizations. Well, ancestor worship, which implied calling on deceased ancestors for fortune and prosperity, was commonplace, as seen in this image and in other places in Eurasia, especially China. Now, sparsely populated North America hosted a number of semi-sedentary agricultural societies as well as various gathering and hunting peoples, rather than the quote-unquote civilizations characteristics of Mesoamerica and the Andes. So to what extent are these North American societies similar to the African Bantu-speaking peoples? Like the Bantu people, North American societies, especially the Chaco, were influenced by politically disparate but commercially and linguistically linked settlements that gradually adopted agricultural techniques and products from elsewhere. In this instance, Mesoamerica, and created localized settlements, but ones large enough to be called societies. All right, so let's talk about North America, the ancestral Pueblo and mound builders. Now, these were village-based societies that were established in the eastern woodlands of North America, Central America, the Caribbean islands, and the Amazon basin. Now, the ancestral Pueblo had pit houses and great houses, and they're predominantly in the southwestern North American region, and they began maize cultivation in the second millennium BCE. And they only became the basis of settled agriculture as maize was gradually adapted to the local environment. And this led to more established permanent villages. Pit houses were in these small settlements, and by 900 CE, many villages also had larger ceremonial structures called kivas, K-I-V-A-S. And they developed local trading networks that were linked to different settlements and sometimes even wider webs of exchange. There's also a development of larger settlements, pueblos. And the most spectacular was at Chaco Canyon. 5 emerged between 860 and 1130 CE. And the largest of the quote-unquote great house or town of Pueblo Bonito was 5 stories high with over 600 rooms. And there are hundreds of roads that radiated out from Chaco, and those were perhaps maybe even a sacred landscape. Now, the elite included highly skilled astronomers, and Chaco was a center for turquoise production. Warfare increased with an extended drought after 1130 CE, and the great houses were eventually abandoned by 1200 CE. All right, North America, the ancestral Pueblo and mound builders continued. Now, the Mississippi River Valley, the agricultural revolution in here by 2000 BCE, and crops weren't productive enough for fully settled agriculture until later. So this led to the creation of societies marked by large earthen mounds. And the earthiest is circa 4000 BCE. The most elaborate of the mound building cultures, the Hopewell culture, was established between 200 BCE and 400 CE. Now at Hopewell, they had large burial mounds and geometric earthworks. Many artifacts have been found in them, so that suggests evidence of extensive trade. And there's also evidence of careful astronomical orientation. Now at Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, that flourished between 900 and 1250 CE. There's the introduction of maize agriculture that allowed for a larger population. And there's a central mound that terraced a pyramid of 4 levels, and the community of about 10,000 people with a widespread trade network that apparently had a stratified class system. Now, 16th century Europeans encountered similar chiefdom among the Natchez in southwestern Mississippi. The paramount chiefs, or quote-unquote great sons, lived in luxury, sons S-U-N-S. They lived in luxury. There was a clear social elite, but the upper class people were required to marry commoners. And there's significant military capacity within this civilization. All right, Pacific Oceania, peoples of the sea. So the environmental impact of human settlement in the Pacific is the moa extinct in New Zealand by 1200 CE. There's a diverse threats to the environment in Hawaii. Now, social complexity developed in Pohnpei and Tonga Islands, and Settler dynasty ruled for centuries on Pohnpei. Now, Pohnpei was quote-unquote Venice of the Pacific due to seawalls and canals, and Tuitonga had powerful military leaders. Now, the Pan-Pacific similarities are the Austronesian language group, the Tautau body art. The ocean was a major source of food, but peoples of Oceania also farmed and raised animals. There are chiefdoms of various types and views of women as dangerous and polluting, yet examples of women exercising power, specifically in Polynesia. Now, in religious life, there's the practical rituals that were performed in order to avoid harm. There's mana, M-A-N-A, a spiritual force in successful individuals, and tapu, T-A-P-U. And these rituals, ritual restrictions or prohibitions were done to make something sacred. And they also had trade networks. La Pizza pottery spread between 1400 and 800 BCE. Obsidian from New Guinea spread 4,000 miles from Borneo to Fiji. The yap, which is a tribute trade to establish protection in times of trouble. Polynesian trade in woven mats links Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji. And voyagers brought South American sweet potatoes and bottle gourds to Rapa Nui, Hawaii, and New Zealand. Okay, so you can see here on the Pacific Oceania map that this covers about 1/3 of the world's surface. The Pacific Ocean encompasses thousands of islands, which were home to many distinct societies, but also constituted a cultural region that shared numerous commonalities and connections. Excuse me. So let's look at this map. About how far is New Guinea from Easter Island, Rapa Nui? Plot a course from New Guinea to Easter Island using other islands as stopping off points. How does an island by island approach change your impression of the journey? The distance between New Guinea to Easter Island is approximately 6,000 to 7,000 miles. To use an island hopping elongates the journey immensely and forces one to interact with many foreign peoples. Let's make connections. While reading Pacific Oceania, Peoples of the Sea, trace on the map the chronological order in which the islands of the Pacific Ocean were settled. Once you do that, think about the patterns you see. Which islands were settled last and why? Well, the human settlement of Oceania began in New Guinea and gradually expanded eastward in a fan shape over thousands of years. The last settled regions were those farthest from New Guinea, including New Zealand, which was settled around 1200 CE. This settlement pattern likely occurred because of the distance and difficulties in traversing the open ocean. All right, the Mao of Rapa Nui. Now, the most iconic artistic representations of Polynesian culture are these huge stone figures called Wai, covered from volcanic rock on the island of Rapa Nui, sometime between 1200 and 1600. They are thought to depict sacred ancestors or even clan chiefs. Around 1,000 of them were quarried and carved. Hundreds were somehow transported up to 8 miles to stand on stone platforms near the coast. The largest were some 33 feet tall and weighed over 80 tons. So to put that into perspective, 1 ton is 2,000 pounds times 80 tons would be what? 160,000 pounds. That's intense. So to what extent are the statues here similar to one from Genoa in the Niger Valley and even the one from Central Africa? Now, both statues depict people with similarly long faces in a seated position, or at least one that emphasizes the torso. Moreover, both statues gaze upwards and into the distance, not at the viewer. All right, so why do you think these columns were carved to resemble multi-story houses? Archaeologists note that few, if any, houses in Axum would have been taller than 3 stories. So what might this 10-story structure convey? Well, the resemblance to multi-story homes could be used to depict the king's authority and power relative to the usual expectation of 3-story homes, which are smaller. Why might conversion to Christianity have led rulers to stop constructing columns to commemorate their burials? Well, Christianity at the time generally required a humility, shown here, and burials were often not elaborate and did not celebrate one's status on earth, but instead one's expectation for life everlasting. So analyze the purpose of the Axumite column. Well, the burial column, if a king's tomb, represents a home for the dead, one likely more elaborate than the one he had on earth. All right, Christian coin from Axum. Some scholars have argued that Axumite coins have been primarily intended to circulate beyond the borders of the kingdom. As evidence, they note that coins like this one use the same weight standards as Roman coins. So what else about this coin supports the theory that was intended to circulate outside of Axum? Well, there's other evidence this coin was targeted for people outside the kingdom, the Christian crosses, the Greek wording, the depiction of the king at the center, which is common among Eurasian coins. If that's true, what impression might King An have hoped to make on foreigners who came across his coin? Well, some of the impressions that it might have made, the aforementioned similarities, made this coin seem as if it came from a society closely integrated with the Mediterranean and Eurasian world. As such, it made Axum seem like a familiar entity to an outsider who perhaps had never visited it. And that concludes our study of alternatives to civilization, and sums up our commonalities and variations in Africa, the Americas, and Pacific Oceania. I'll see you guys next time.